There are moments that decide an entire lifetime without asking permission first. They arrive in ordinary places. A dusty train platform, a stranger's voice, a single choice made before the next breath. One such moment happened during the autumn of 1876 in a small Nevada town that most maps barely bothered to mention. A young woman stood on the iron steps of a departing train. One hand gripped the polished rail, the other held a crumpled ticket that would carry her all the way back to Boston. Below her stood a cowboy covered in trail dust. His hat was crushed between nervous hands. A few moments earlier, he had stopped her from climbing aboard by gently catching her wrist. Now, he had already let go. He wasn't trying to force her to stay. He was simply hoping she might choose it herself. Steam rolled across the platform. The conductor checked his pocket watch. The locomotive hissed impatiently. The whole station seemed to hold its breath. "Please," the cowboy said, his voice rough enough to betray every sleepless night behind it. "Just give me one chance." She stared at him. His boots were stained with mud. His hands carried fresh cuts from fencing wire. Nothing about him belonged to the polished drawing rooms she had grown up in. Yet his eyes held more honesty than any gentleman she had ever known. Behind her waited Boston, her mother's expectations. A wealthy fiancé she had never loved. A life where every decision had already been made before she was even asked. Below her stood a man she barely knew, a stranger asking her to gamble her future on nothing except his word. The whistle screamed. If this story finds something familiar inside your heart, tell us where you're watching from today. Every town carries stories about one decision that changed everything forever. Wilhelmina Dalton looked down at the cowboy again. His breathing was uneven from running. "I've watched you," he admitted quietly. Her eyebrows lifted. "For nearly 3 months. Embarrassment colored his weathered face. "You walked to the schoolhouse every morning carrying a book." He managed a small smile. "You read while you walked." She remembered. More than once she had nearly walked into wagons because she refused to stop reading. "I saw you stand up to the school board." His voice grew steadier. "They tried to frighten you. They failed. You never backed down." Wilhelmina felt something tighten inside her chest. No one had ever noticed those moments before. People usually noticed her family name, her expensive dresses, her manners. No one had noticed her courage. The conductor called again. 2 minutes. Daniel Walker swallowed hard. "I know who I am." His eyes dropped to his calloused hands. "I'm just a ranch hand trying to keep 40 acres alive. My handwriting looks like chicken scratches. I've never owned more than one good suit." He laughed softly at himself. "But if you leave today," his words stopped. He looked toward the train. Then back at her. "I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I should have spoken sooner." Silence settled between them. The train lurched. Its wheels began turning. Slowly, Wilhelmina looked through the open doorway behind her. Passengers settled into wooden seats. Ladies adjusted gloves. Gentlemen unfolded newspapers. Everything looked clean, safe, predictable, exactly like the life waiting back east. Then she looked at Daniel. He wasn't reaching for her anymore. He simply stood there, waiting. The train gathered speed. The conductor touched her arm. "Ma'am, we're moving." Wilhelmina stepped down. One boot touched the platform, then the other. The train rolled past beside her. Wind pulled loose strands of hair across her face. Her heavy trunk bounced from the iron steps. The leather straps snapped apart. Dresses spilled across the weathered boards. Gray wool, blue cotton, white linen. A small leather-bound book slid across the platform and stopped against Daniel's boot. Neither of them moved. The final passenger car disappeared into the desert. Its red lantern became smaller. Smaller still. Then, vanished. Only silence remained. The station suddenly felt enormous. Daniel slowly knelt beside the scattered clothing. Without speaking, he gathered each dress carefully. He folded them with surprising gentleness. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was careless. When he picked up the small book, he noticed the faded gold title, Education for Young Women. His rough thumb rested on the cover for a moment before he carefully placed it inside the trunk. You can still change your mind. His voice barely rose above the wind. I won't stop you. Wilhelmina looked at him. You already did. He smiled for the first time. Not proudly, not triumphantly, just warmly. No. He lifted the damaged trunk onto one shoulder. You stopped yourself. He started walking toward town. After several quiet seconds, she followed. Hawthorn spread across the valley beneath the afternoon sun. Dust drifted along the main street. The blacksmith's hammer echoed between weathered storefronts. Children chased one another outside the general store. Everything felt smaller than Boston. Simpler, real. Daniel led her away from the busy street toward a narrow 2-story building with faded lettering above the porch. Jennings Dressmaking and Boarding. He climbed the porch steps, knocked twice. Heavy footsteps sounded inside. The door opened. An older woman with gray hair pulled tightly beneath a faded bonnet studied both of them without smiling. What have you brought me now, Miss Walker? Daniel carefully lowered the trunk. A teacher. The woman frowned. This town already ran one off. Wilhelmina answered before Daniel could. I know. It was me. The older woman's expression didn't change. She looked Wilhelmina up and down. Dusty boots, travel-worn dress, tired eyes. Then she gave a short laugh. So you're the stubborn one. She stepped aside. Come in. The back room is empty. And I could use someone who understands numbers better than I do. Warm air drifted from inside, carrying the smell of fresh bread, beeswax, wool, and soap. For the first time since leaving Boston, Wilhelmina felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't safety. It was possibility. As she crossed the doorway, a young girl peeked from behind a curtain separating the sewing shop from the living quarters. She couldn't have been older than 12. Dark braids hung over both shoulders. Ink stains covered her fingertips. The girl's curious eyes stayed locked on Wilhelmina. Mama? The older woman turned. What is it, Lucy? The girl lowered her voice just enough to make Wilhelmina lean closer. Is she the teacher who got fired for teaching girls the same lessons as boys? The room fell completely silent. Mrs. Jennings slowly looked back at Wilhelmina. Daniel remained perfectly still beside the broken trunk. And before anyone could answer, the bell above the front door rang again. A tall man wearing an expensive charcoal suit stepped inside. His polished boots had never touched ranch dirt. His silver watch chain gleamed beneath the afternoon light. The moment Wilhelmina saw his face, every bit of warmth she had started to feel disappeared. Her older brother had found her. Thomas Dalton looked around the small dress shop as though every board beneath his polished boots offended him. The smell of fresh bread, wool, and beeswax clearly did not belong in his world. His eyes settled on Wilhelmina. For several long seconds he simply stared. Then, his voice finally broke the silence. So this is where you've been hiding. Wilhelmina stood straighter. I wasn't hiding. I left. Thomas removed his gloves, one finger at a time. You certainly look different. His eyes traveled over her simple cotton dress, the ink stains on her fingers, the worn boots, the loose strands of hair escaping beneath her bonnet. You've forgotten how a Dalton should look. Mrs. Jennings folded her arms. She's dressed like someone who actually works. Thomas ignored her completely. Mother sent me. Wilhelmina felt her heartbeat quicken. Is she ill? Thomas hesitated. The doctor says her heart has grown weaker. His voice softened just enough to make the words hurt more. "She asks about you every day." Silence filled the room. Daniel quietly stepped toward the door. "I'll come back later." "No." Wilhelmina stopped him. "Please stay." Thomas slowly turned toward Daniel. Only now did he seem to notice the cowboy standing nearby. His expression hardened. "And you are?" "Daniel Walker." Thomas offered no handshake. His eyes examined Daniel the same way a banker might inspect broken farm equipment. "So you're the cowboy?" Daniel answered calmly. "I'm a rancher." Barely, Thomas smiled without warmth. "I asked around before coming. 40 acres. A ranch buried in debt. Not exactly the future father imagined for his daughter." Daniel didn't answer. He simply met Thomas's stare. Mrs. Jennings stepped between them. "This house doesn't welcome insults." Thomas reached inside his coat and removed a folded letter. "My mother wrote this herself." He handed it to Wilhelmina. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The familiar handwriting immediately brought tears to her eyes. "My dearest Wilhelmina, every morning I pray you are safe. I do not know why you left. Perhaps I failed to understand your heart. If I did, forgive me. I only wish to see you once more. Please, come home. Your loving mother." Wilhelmina lowered the letter slowly. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment she was back in Boston, walking polished hallways, listening to piano music drift through the family home, watching servants prepare elegant dinners. Everything had seemed perfect, everything except her own life. Thomas quietly broke the silence. "Mr. Harrison is still waiting." Wilhelmina looked up sharply. "I never agreed to marry him. You never refused either. I refused every single day." Thomas sighed. "He's wealthy. Respected. He can give you comfort." Daniel quietly looked away. Thomas noticed. "You see?" He nodded toward the cowboy. "What exactly can he offer?" No one answered. Thomas continued. "A leaking ranch, debt, and years of struggle." Mrs. Jennings' voice suddenly filled the room. "He can offer honesty." Thomas barely looked at her. "Honesty doesn't buy food." "No," Mrs. Jennings replied calmly, "but money doesn't buy peace." Lucy quietly appeared from behind the curtain. She looked back and forth between everyone. Then softly asked, "Miss Wilhelmina, are you leaving?" The question hung heavily in the room. Wilhelmina couldn't answer, because she honestly didn't know. Thomas stepped closer. "The train leaves tomorrow morning. I've already reserved your ticket. You've embarrassed this family long enough." Daniel finally spoke. "That's enough." His voice remained quiet, yet every person inside the room immediately fell silent. Thomas slowly faced him. "You believe she belongs here?" Daniel nodded once. "I believe she should choose." Thomas laughed. "A choice? You really think life works that way?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "It should." Thomas looked at Wilhelmina. "You have until sunrise. If you're not standing beside me at the station," he paused, "don't expect to find your place waiting in Boston." He placed the ticket on the counter, then turned and walked out. The bell above the door rang once. Silence followed. Lucy looked frightened. Mrs. Jennings quietly returned to her sewing machine. Only the slow clicking of the needle broke the stillness. Daniel remained standing near the doorway. "I should go." Wilhelmina looked toward him. "I don't know what to do." He walked closer, stopped only a few feet away. "I can't answer that. I wish you could." He smiled sadly. "If I tell you to stay, you'll always wonder if I stole your future. If I tell you to leave, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened." He carefully placed his hat back onto his head. "So I'll only tell you one thing." She waited. "You deserve a life that's your own." He tipped his hat politely toward Mrs. Jennings, then quietly walked outside. Wilhelmina watched through the front window. He didn't mount his horse immediately. Instead, He stood beside the hitching post for nearly a minute, looking toward the distant mountains, as though trying to gather enough strength to ride away. Finally, he climbed into the saddle. Without once looking back, he disappeared down the dusty road. That evening, the dress shop felt unusually quiet. Lucy barely spoke during supper. Mrs. Jennings continued sewing beneath the warm glow of an oil lamp. Wilhelmina sat alone near the window. Her mother's letter rested beside Thomas's train ticket. 2 pieces of paper. 2 entirely different lives. Long after everyone had gone to bed, she still hadn't moved. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floor. Outside, the desert wind whispered softly through the empty street. Then came 3 gentle knocks. Not at the front door, at the back entrance. She recognized them immediately. Daniel. She stood, walked halfway across the room, then stopped. "I know you're awake." His voice came quietly through the wood. "I won't bother you. I just wanted you to know." He hesitated. "If tomorrow you decide to leave, I won't hate you." She covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "I'll be grateful, because meeting you changed my life." No answer came from inside. Daniel remained silent for another moment, then continued. "If you stay, I'll spend every day trying to deserve it." His footsteps slowly moved away. Wilhelmina rushed to the small window overlooking the alley. Daniel hadn't gone home. He sat alone on the back steps beneath the cold autumn sky, hat resting across his knees, head lowered, waiting, not because he expected an answer tonight, simply because he couldn't leave while knowing she was hurting. The sight broke something inside her. She opened the back door. Cold night air rushed into the room. Daniel immediately stood. "You shouldn't be sitting out here." He smiled gently. "I've slept in colder places." She walked toward him. Moonlight revealed the exhaustion across his face. "You really would let me go?" He nodded. "If leaving makes you happy, and if staying doesn't, then I'll carry that disappointment. But it'll be mine, not yours." She looked at him for a long time. "You make everything sound so simple." He laughed quietly. "It isn't. I'm scared every minute." "Of what?" "Losing you." The words landed harder than any grand speech ever could. Neither of them spoke again. They simply sat together beneath the stars while the quiet Nevada wind drifted across the empty street. Just before dawn, Wilhelmina finally whispered something so softly, Daniel almost missed it. "I still don't know what I'm going to choose." Daniel slowly reached into his coat pocket. He removed a small leather bookmark. Its edges had been carefully carved by hand. "I made this." He looked embarrassed. "I'm no good at fancy gifts." "I remembered you always carried books." She accepted it carefully. A tiny wildflower had been carved into the leather. Nothing expensive, nothing perfect, but every cut showed patient hands. She looked up. Their eyes met. For the first time since stepping off the train, Wilhelmina realized something that frightened her even more than returning to Boston. She was already beginning to fall in love with the cowboy who had asked for only one chance. Just then, the loud whistle of the early morning train echoed across Hawthorne. Thomas would already be waiting at the station, and in only a few minutes, she would have to choose which life would disappear forever. The whistle echoed across Hawthorne just as the first light of morning spread over the Nevada desert. Wilhelmina stood outside the dress shop. One hand held her mother's letter. The other held the small leather bookmark Daniel had carved for her. "Mrs. Jennings quietly squeezed her shoulder. "You already know the answer." Wilhelmina looked toward the station. "I just wish it didn't hurt." Mrs. Jennings smiled gently. "The right choice often does." Without another word, Wilhelmina started walking. The station platform was already crowded. Steam rolled beneath the waiting locomotive. Passengers loaded trunks onto baggage carts. Thomas Dalton stood near the first passenger coach. His polished boots looked strangely out of place against the dusty boards. The moment he saw her approaching, relief crossed his face. "I knew you'd come." He reached for her suitcase. She didn't let go. "I came to answer you." His smile slowly faded. "You packed." "I packed because I needed to decide." Thomas nodded toward the train. "Then let's go home." Wilhelmina remained where she stood. "This isn't my home anymore." The words landed like a hammer. Thomas stared at her. "You don't mean that." "I do." She handed him their mother's letter. "I'll always love our family. I'll always love Mother. But I won't spend my life living someone else's dream." His jaw tightened. "You'd choose this place?" She smiled softly. "I'd choose myself." Thomas looked down at the letter. Then across the platform, Daniel stood near the hitching rail, far enough away not to interfere, close enough to be there if she needed him. Thomas followed her gaze. "You're choosing him?" Wilhelmina slowly shook her head. "No, I'm choosing the life I want." Silence stretched between brother and sister. The conductor called for passengers. Thomas looked at the open train door. Then, back at Wilhelmina. "You understand what you're giving up?" "My inheritance. Our name. Our place in Boston." She nodded. "I understand. And you're willing to lose it?" "I already spent my whole life losing myself. I'm finished doing that." For several seconds, Thomas said nothing. Then he slowly folded the ticket in half. Again and again. Until it became nothing more than a crumpled piece of paper. "You've become someone Father wouldn't recognize." Wilhelmina smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why I'm finally happy." The whistle screamed once more. Thomas climbed aboard without another word. As the train slowly pulled away, he stood beside the window. Neither of them waved. Neither looked away. Only after the final passenger car disappeared beyond the valley did Wilhelmina finally breathe again. Daniel remained exactly where he had been. Waiting, not expecting. Simply waiting. She walked toward him. Each step felt lighter than the one before. When she finally stopped in front of him, neither of them spoke. Daniel searched her face. "You stayed." He smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "I don't have much." "I know. My ranch needs work." "I know. I still owe money." "I know, and I still don't know half the words in those books you read." She laughed through fresh tears. "I know." He looked down awkwardly. "I guess I still only have one thing left to offer." "What's that?" "My whole heart." She stepped closer. "That's the only thing I ever wanted." Daniel gently took her hands. "I don't have a ring. You've already given me something better." She lifted the small leather bookmark. "I'll keep this forever." His ears turned red. "I carved it 3 times before getting it right." She smiled. "I can tell." Several months passed. Winter settled over Nevada. Life became busy in the simplest ways. Wilhelmina helped Mrs. Jennings keep the accounts. She began teaching neighborhood children each afternoon in the back room. Girls learned arithmetic beside boys. No one was turned away. Lucy became her happiest student. Daniel visited every evening at exactly 5. Sometimes he brought apples, sometimes honey, sometimes nothing at all, except himself. Those became Wilhelmina's favorite visits. Spring arrived with fresh grass across the valley. Daniel invited her to ride out to the highest hill overlooking his ranch, the same hill where he had once confessed his fears. They watched the sunset together. Orange light covered the mountains. The wind carried the smell of sage. Daniel quietly cleared his throat. "I've been thinking." She smiled. "I can see that. I still don't have much." She laughed softly. "You've mentioned that once or twice." He looked embarrassed. "I probably always will." He slowly dropped onto one knee. The dry grass bent beneath him. His rough hands trembled. "I can't promise riches. I can't promise an easy life. I can only promise that you'll never face a hard day alone." His blue eyes searched hers. "Wilhelmina Dalton," he stopped, shook his head, then smiled. "No, Wilhelmina, will you marry me?" Tears immediately filled her eyes. She remembered Boston, the elegant dinners, the carefully arranged proposals, the expensive gifts. None of them had ever asked what she wanted. This cowboy had asked her from the very beginning. He had asked her to stay, asked her opinion, asked her dreams, asked her future. Now he asked for her heart. She answered without hesitation. Yes. Daniel let out a long breath he had apparently been holding for months. He laughed. Actually laughed. She had never heard a happier sound. He stood and wrapped both arms around her. "I'll build you a house." She rested her forehead against his chest. "As long as it has room for books." He grinned. "It'll have shelves on every wall." Their wedding took place during the warmth of summer. The little church overflowed with neighbors. Mrs. Jennings cried openly. Lucy carried wildflowers instead of expensive roses. Daniel wore the only suit he owned. It wasn't perfect. Neither was the church. Neither was the ranch waiting outside. But every smile inside that room was real. The years passed quickly. The struggling ranch slowly grew stronger. Daniel paid off every dollar he owed. Fence by fence, field by field, season after season. Wilhelmina reopened the town school. Girls sat beside boys. Everyone learned the same lessons. Parents who once doubted her slowly became her greatest supporters. Books filled the shelves Daniel had promised. Children filled the classrooms she built. Laughter filled the home they created together. Years later, 4 children raced across the ranch yard beneath the same wide Nevada sky. Daniel still watched every sunset from the porch. Wilhelmina always joined him. One quiet evening, nearly 30 years after the train station, they sat together in 2 old rocking chairs while their grandson chased chickens through the yard. The mountains glowed orange beneath the fading sun. Daniel reached over and gently took her weathered hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you got on that train?" Wilhelmina smiled. She looked across the ranch they had built together. The schoolhouse standing proudly beyond the trees. The children laughing. The shelves full of books. The man beside her whose hands were still rough after all those years. Then she looked toward the railroad that disappeared across the desert. "I do." Daniel waited quietly. She squeezed his hand, and every single time, "I'm grateful I stepped back onto that platform." He lifted her hand and kissed it just as gently as he had held her wrist all those years before. The sun slipped behind the mountains. The evening grew quiet. Their grandson laughed somewhere across the yard. A breeze carried the smell of fresh hay and sage. Wilhelmina rested her head against Daniel's shoulder. One choice. One train. One cowboy willing to ask for one chance. That single moment had become an entire lifetime, and if she had to choose all over again, she would still step off that train. Every single time.